Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today called Mentoring Through the Generations. We're really excited to have you with us for the next hour to talk about this new research study from Mentor. Those of you who were at the summit a few weeks ago or following it online probably saw some news and some announcement about this, but we thought today we'd take a little bit of time to unpack the findings and really kind of walk everyone through kind of what we learned in this new research study, tell you kind of how we went about finding these things, and then answer any questions folks have about our research findings. Really, I'm hoping to leave a good amount of time at the end of the hour here for questions and reflections from you all about how this research might influence your work or just questions you have about our findings. So thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us this morning for those of us on the West Coast, and good afternoon to those of you out east. I am Mike Geringer, the Director of Research and Evaluation at Mentor at our national office. Been in that role for almost a decade now, leading the various research and research to practice products that Mentor produces. I'm joined today by my co-author and partner in crime on this study, Chelsea Benning. Chelsea, do you want to take a few minutes and introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your work?
Of course. Thank you so much, Mike. Hello, everyone. I won't take too much of your time. I think you're probably going to have a lot of questions, and Mike has a lot of wonderful information. I've listened to him speak to this several times now, and every single time he says something just a little bit more thought-provoking and a little different way of looking at this and what the path are forward. But yes, as Mike mentioned, my name is Chelsea Benning. I'm the founder and chief research officer at Olympic Research and Strategy, formerly Pacific Market Research, where I have worked with Mike a few times now on really understanding and making sure from a research and defensible position that we are truly understanding the nation's current situation and past situation when it comes to these topics. So I think at the end, there'll be a way to contact me, and I do encourage and welcome any questions that you might have about this research and any interest in further understanding the data. We can certainly provide that, and I'd love to talk about the subject. So thank you all, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you for putting no pressure on me to be extremely thought-provoking in the next hour here. But now, for folks who are interested in, really collecting information from the public about your work in any way, Chelsea and her team have been fantastic partners to Mentor in all of these research studies. So please reach out to her if you've got any questions about the work that they do. So here's what we're going to be covering for the next hour. There on the right-hand side, you'll see the cover of the wonderfully desktop published Who Mentored You report. There's also an executive summary of this available on the Mentor website, a little two-pager that kind of breaks down the main findings. If folks want to go and download this, either now or after the event here, there's the URL on the Mentor website. Should be fairly easy to find once you get there. But today we're going to really walk through the major findings and the themes that we settled on as kind of the main kind of talking points around this. We'll also talk about kind of what I think at least are some paths forward for the mentoring movement in addressing some of the barriers that we found in this study to kids getting mentoring. And then, like we said, I really want to end with some Q&A time. And since folks always ask this in the Q&A, yes, the recording of this webinar and the slides will be available after the event. I'll also note that we're going to show some slides here that have some really complicated graphics and charts and stuff on them. All of this is taken directly from the report. So if you're furiously taking notes and trying to write down some exact numbers on something and we move on to the next slide, just know that every graphic in here is pulled actually from that report. So you'll be able to look at all that stuff in more detail there. And then today, obviously, we're going to keep everyone's phones and audio muted just for recording quality here. But I encourage everyone to ask questions via the Q&A panel that should be available to you in the little Zoom kind of bar of menu options, whatever those things are called. So go ahead and type your questions in there, and we'll get to them at a couple of different points throughout the event here. So I'm going to start with just some basics about what the heck this study was. What did we do? Why did we do it? That kind of thing. And before I get into that, I do want to thank some partners in this, as you always do when you have research projects. There's no way you can do it alone. We've already talked about Chelsea and her team at Olympic Research and Strategy. I also want to thank my friend, Dr. Sam McQuillan at South Carolina. He and a team of grad students were really helpful in helping us design this survey, but also getting it through institutional review board approval. We did ask some questions about things from people's childhood that could be a little triggering and may bring up some strong feelings. And so we wanted to make sure that we did this the right way and did it with participant kind of safety in mind. And so we did go through an IRB for this, and Sam and his team were instrumental in that. Sean and Kathleen at Inclusive Data, they led a couple of really fantastic focus groups that we did. We'll explain more about how those fit into the survey that we did, but they were really outstanding in terms of getting people's voices and emotions and opinions out about mentoring that they had when they were a young person. And it was really kind of beautiful to see some of the quotes and some of the memories that they kind of got out of those focus groups. I also want to thank our colleagues up at Mentor Canada, who in many ways were instrumental in helping us refine our survey. There were a number of questions in this that we actually pulled directly from work that they had done a few years ago to kind of map the landscape of people's mentoring experiences up in Canada. So it was really nice to collaborate with them on this and build off of their efforts. We're actually talking with them about putting together some kind of compare and contrast between how does mentoring experiences look between American adults and Canadian adults. So there might be some cool international vibes coming out of this down the road. And then lastly, but certainly not least, our partners at EY for their generous support of this project. And I have found them over the last 15 years, 20 years of my time in mentoring to be really generous supporters of our mentoring movement as a whole. So big thanks to EY for making all of this possible and for kind of having an interest in mentoring research. So big thanks to them. So the main impetus for this study was to update something that Mentor did about 10 years ago, right before I joined the national office. If many of you may have seen, there was a report called The Mentoring Effect, in which they had surveyed a group of statistically representative young adults, ages 18 to 21, and asked them to reflect back on the mentoring that they may or may not have received while growing up. That was the report where Mentor first kind of learned about and started to talk about the mentoring gap of 1 in 3 young people growing up without having had a mentor. There was a bunch of other stuff that we learned in that study about how mentoring relationships were not equally, were equitably distributed across American kids. And so a lot of our work over the next 10 years really came out of that study. Well, one of the things we wanted to do here was take a fresh look at that mentoring gap. Obviously, we're trying to grow our field. We're hoping that more kids are getting more mentoring than ever before. We wanted to see maybe that gap had shrunk a little bit. We wanted to really also create kind of a historical look at how mentoring may have changed for Americans over time, right? So this study, you'll see in a minute, we talked to a broad swath of Americans, really of all ages, to see if folks, that from the baby boomer generation said different things about mentoring than today's young people, and everyone kind of in between. I also wanted to get a deeper understanding of how Americans think about the value that mentoring had on their life. One of the things we lack as a field is longitudinal research that really examines, well, if we mentor all these middle schoolers, what do we get 30, 40 years later when they are all grown up? Are they better citizens? Did they have happier lives? Because of this mentoring experience when they were young. We don't really have a lot of good information like that in the mentoring field. And so I wanted to really get Americans thinking back about how did this change the trajectory of your life? What kind of value did this relationship when you were 10, 12, 14 years old, did it change who you are? And do you still feel its influence today? So we have lots of good information about that. And then, if it was valuable, why? What was it that these special people did as you were growing up to make you feel loved or help you with a problem? How exactly did a mentor help you out? And so these were kind of the main buckets that we wanted to learn some things about in this study. I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea here to talk a little bit about the methodology. Folks may be wondering, well, who did you find? Who did you ask? How did you go about doing this? So Chelsea, take a few minutes here and explain kind of the what behind what we did here.
Of course, thank you. So as you can see on your screen, if you're following along, we used a mixed methodology quantitative-based survey as our primary method of data collection with some additional focus groups that Mike spoke to at the beginning. One of the things that's a real challenge here is how do we account for all the different ways that individuals can participate in this kind of research study? And we wanted to make sure that we were inclusive as much as possible, that we offered ways in which to participate that were accounting different cultures, different backgrounds. So we combined both an online survey with a telephone survey, which is a little bit unusual in today's day and age to do something over the telephone. But the reason why we did that is that we know that certain areas, rural areas, certain cultures, non-English speaking folk, they are less likely to be present and available online. So we did about 20% over the telephone using in-culture voices. So individuals who spoke Spanish as a first language, they also spoke English as well. I did a lot of calling. Members from the LGBTQ community did a portion of the calling. Members from the Black community also did a portion of the calling, which would allow for those that were interacting and talking about these experiences to be within culture. So that was very important to us. We also did, of course, many surveys that were done online. You will note, and I don't know that we'll spend a whole lot of time about it today, that the online version was a little bit longer. We were able to go into a little bit more depth than we were over the telephone, but the key metrics that we're looking at here today were done in both ways. Mike already mentioned one of the goals of this was to get a real generational view. So we surveyed adults from ages 18 to 80 with an oversample of adults that were in Gen Z, both 18 to 22 and then 22 to 24, to kind of provide a lens of both the young and the older Gen Z. I already spoke to the next couple of points. So on the next slide here, we can actually see some numbers in terms of what the size. We get a lot of questions about, how can we be assured that this is representative and actually enough critical mass in order to say that these are statistically reliable? So you can see these are very healthy sample sizes, and again, with a particular oversample among the younger Gen Z groups, ages 18 to 21, and then the older Gen Z, about half of the sample came from those two groups, with the remainder of the sample, about 1,200, split along those three generational groups, millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. Finally, one other mention that I will make, and I'll turn it back to Mike, is that, of course, because we oversampled certain populations, we oversampled populations to include people of color, those from Indigenous backgrounds, and members of the Native community, as well as those from the Black community. We did weight all results back to the true U.S. adult population using census figures from 2020, and that is just to ensure that as we look at the nation as a whole, that those are reflective of the composition of our nation. I'll turn it back to you, Mike, and thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Chelsea. And if folks have any questions about this kind of methodological stuff, just ask them in the Q&A place, and we'll get to them here as we go forward. But you'll notice the margin of error here is pretty good in terms of how these national polls go. We were very happy with kind of the accuracy of this when all was said and done. I'll note here, and this was also a little bit on the last slide, but because we're taking kind of this multi-generational look, I want to make sure that folks are clear about kind of how we defined those generations. These are fairly standard kind of year and age ranges for these generational cohorts. But I wanted to explain this. One of the reasons we oversampled this younger Gen Z population is that was the same age range as that study I mentioned previously, the mentoring effect study. And we wanted to be able to do a true apples to apples comparison with that cohort of young people. So we really needed a lot of young people so we could compare historically, but then also knew that we wanted to tell this multi-generational story. I'll also note that this survey asked about both mentors who came through programs and were kind of provided to young people, but also asked a lot about kind of what you might think of as naturally occurring mentors, teachers, coaches, faith leaders, next door neighbors, aunties and uncles, folks who just were naturally in young people's lives with whom those young people forged some kind of relationship that they felt was a true mentoring relationship. So that's kind of how we define some things and who we heard from in what you're about to see in terms of findings. So what are those main findings? The slide begged. Well, there's really 5 major themes, and this is what we're going to unpack over the next half hour or so. The first theme is that over time, we see major increases in the rates of mentoring. There are more people getting mentoring today than at any other point. We've really grown this movement, and a lot of that is through the growth of programs. So we'll unpack that a little bit. Unfortunately, one of the things that we found was that today's young people, that youngest Gen Z cohort, is really reporting a sharp uptick in kind of the rates of folks saying, I didn't have a mentor. So for today's young people, the rates of mentoring seem to be declining and fairly sharply. And so that was disturbing, to say the least, and we'll get into why that might be here in a bit. We also wanted to take kind of an alternate way of thinking about this mentoring gap, knowing that 1 in 3 young people are growing up never having had a mentor at any point in that childhood and adolescence. I mean, that's a meaningful number, but I wanted to know, even for those people that got a mentor, were there times when you wanted a mentor but didn't have one? And so it's an alternative way of looking at that mentoring gap, right? Over time, over your whole childhood, yes, we want you to have a mentor, but there may have been plenty of other moments where you wanted a mentor and didn't have one. So we really have some good information around that. And unfortunately, most kids can remember a time when they really wanted a mentor, but did not have one. We'll end with a couple of positive themes here. I know those first 3 sound a little bit like some bad news, but we found some great things about how much of their own success Americans attribute to the mentors they had when they were growing up. And then we also asked about what we called your most meaningful mentor. You may have had 3 or 4 or 5 mentors, but chances are there was one person in there that kind of rose up to be the person that you most think of when you think about the mentoring that you had, your most meaningful one, if you will. And so we asked a bunch of questions about, well, what did those people do? What made them your most meaningful mentor? And I think we learned a lot about the ways that adults show up for young people and what those children value when adults do show up. So that's what we're going to kind of unpack as we go forward here. So let's just dive right into theme number 1, major increases in the mentoring movement over the last 30 years or so. There's a lot going on this slide, but I think I'll start everyone out on the right-hand side of the screen here. You'll see for baby boomers, fairly unlikely to have had mentoring. I mean, some good percentages there, but not even half saying I had a mentor growing up. And you see a slow progression as you move from the right to the left on the colored bars there. The rate of mentoring really kind of going up, kind of hitting a peak, if you will, with the millennials. It's 70% almost of them saying I had a mentor of some kind growing up. Now you'll notice that the teal bar there, that's kind of naturally formed mentoring relationships. That's fairly steady over time. There's a little bit of growth, but the yellow bar is programmatic mentoring, and look at the growth over time. I got into mentoring about 25 years ago, right before the turn of the century, which is a phrase I don't like saying out loud because it makes me sound ancient, but and look at the growth since then, right? More than double the rate of my Gen X cohort to have had a programmatic mentor. And I think all of us in the movement should feel very good about this, because really, natural mentoring has remained fairly stable over time. Kids find these relationships kind of at about the same rate they did 20, 30 years ago. But it's really been the growth in programs that can come in and fill a gap and maybe take care of a need that nobody in that natural circle of support could help take care of, right? And so this is a really nice feather in the cap of our movement. And I think we should feel very good about how we have grown this over time. We also wanted to look at who's experiencing this kind of growth the most, right? So we split this out by a number of ways. You'll see more in the full report, but this slide here is looking at the distinctions between respondents who identified as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color versus folks who identified as white only. And as you'll see, kind of within each of these age cohorts, BIPOC folks tend to have a little bit more mentoring than their white peers. That's, there's some ebbs and flows to it here, but I think we really find a lot of growth, especially in programmatic mentoring, even though like that younger Gen Z group is kind of experiencing this decline in mentoring. You'll see there's actually been a little uptick in the programmatic mentoring for BIPOC younger Gen Z folks. So all this to say is that there are some differences along kind of race lines when you look at this, but it's more BIPOC folks expressing I've got more mentoring in my life generally than white individuals. So I'll have folks focus on this slide. This looks at socioeconomic status situation. On the right, you have kind of how you are now as an adult. And you'll see some differences there, but I do want folks to focus on the left-hand side of this, which is, when you were growing up, the circumstances that you were in when you needed this help of a mentor. You'll notice that, unfortunately, the wealthier you are, the more likely you are to have mentors in your life. Now, this is something that other research has confirmed many times, including that earlier mentoring effects study by Mentor. So this was not a surprise to us, but I think it is a little bit disheartening to see kind of the way money influences your access to mentors and caring adults, right? Now, this is for the whole sample. This is for everyone from baby boomers up through young people today. So, once again, this has been reflected in plenty of other research. But on the next slide, I'm going to show you what it looks like just for Gen Z today, right? The youngest folks in our sample. And you'll notice, like on this slide here, there's a 13-point gap between the wealthiest individuals having mentors and the poorest individuals. When it comes to Gen Z, though, that gap's closed. It's only a 9% difference. And in fact, it's actually middle-class folks that are most likely to say, I had a mentor when I was growing up. So I feel this is a little bit of evidence that our mentoring movement has done a good job of directing mentoring services, programmatic mentoring to young people that are kind of growing up with the most need, right? Folks in poverty, folks in marginalized communities. I think this is another thing for our movement to feel good about, right? We talked about the inequity of who gets mentoring relationships in our society. To me, this is proof that we're closing that inequity. We're closing that gap, right? And so I think there's more work to be done here. Obviously, having wealth in your household allows you to buy a lot of programmatic experiences. You're also probably surrounded by a lot of natural mentors, but I think we should feel good about these numbers. But you'll also note, once again, almost half of those growing up in poverty say I didn't have a mentor. So more work to be done, but some proof that we're doing the right things. Chelsea and I also wanted to just see if various groupings of demographics, anything popped out when you kind of combined some of these demographic things. The two areas here that I will note are the areas with circles on them. We really found some interesting things around rural Americans and very, very low rates of mentoring in rural communities. You'll see here particularly low-income rural folks, only 11% of those folks reporting that they had a mentor or a programmatic mentor, and less than half saying I had a mentor of any kind. Low income and female, right? I think a lot of times our mentoring services are directed at those getting in the most trouble, perhaps. That tends to be a lot of boys, unfortunately, historically. And so a lot of girls reporting, I'm low income, I'm a girl, I don't have anybody, right? Those numbers look very different for low income males, as you can see right next to them, much higher rates of mentoring, particularly through programs. So there's all kinds of other interesting combinations. Chelsea and I probably could have run variations on this for 100 years and not exhausted different subgroups, but some colleagues of ours are going to be doing some secondary analysis and might turn up some more useful breakdowns like this. a little bit more evidence that we're doing a good job getting mentoring to those who need it the most. We asked a whole battery of questions around, did you have some positive things happen while you were growing up? And then we also asked about a whole bunch of negative things, so what we called adverse life experiences. We didn't use the infamous ACEs scale, but it was a similar selection of things: experiencing homelessness, being in the child welfare system, substance misuse in the home, those types of things, things that, would signify a lot of need for a young person. And as you'll see, if you had 4 or more of those things happen during your childhood, which is a pretty rough childhood by any definition, only 15% of baby boomers said I had a mentor to help me through all that. I got a little bit better for my Gen X peeps, but then you'll see for millennials and then even today's Gen Z young folks, much higher rates of mentoring. Now, still 36% means that there's a lot of young people that have experienced a lot of trauma that are still not getting mentoring. But to me, this is once again good proof that over time, our movement has really emphasized getting mentoring services, especially in programs to young people that are kind of experiencing the most and probably have the most need for that additional adult support. We also then asked folks, well, okay, you grew up and you said you didn't have a mentor at all. Why? What was the barrier to you having one? And you'll see here there's some differences over time that once again, I think highlight kind of the growth of our movement a little bit. Baby boomers were just more likely to be like, I don't know how to find one. I don't know what this is all about. I don't understand the value of it. I don't know if there's programs around me. And as we've grown this movement and popularized mentoring services for kids, you'll see that over time for millennials and for Gen Z, those types of barriers kind of fell away. Unfortunately, towards the bottom of this chart, you see some barriers that are growing. Things like the programs that are available to me don't seem like a good fit for what's going on with me. Which, I'd love to unpack that more with these folks and find out what was it about it that wasn't a good fit. Was it you didn't feel like the staff reflected your cultural background and heritage and understanding right? Or was it they were focused on academics and you needed mental health support? Like, we don't know too much about how they didn't fit with their needs, but that's an interesting thing for us as a field to reflect on. How often are we building our services around what young people are saying they need versus what we as adults think they need, right? There's often a big distinction there. I'm very troubled by the 17% that said other kids your age looked down on mentoring. Now, I think one of the unfortunate side effects of always directing, or not always, but this emphasis on directing mentoring towards young people with serious needs is that it does create a perception in the general public that they're like, oh, mentoring is for those young people. When in the reality is every young person needs mentors and lots of them throughout their life. So one of the things we have to be careful of, I think, as a field is not positioning mentoring as something that is only for young people experiencing the worst of the worst or severe trauma, but the mentoring is an asset for all young people. And because I think it creates a bit of a stigma around, oh, you're the kid that needs a mentor. That's not the way we should be framing this work for anybody, right? And so, Chelsea, you even mentioned the story about your own son. They reached out through the school, and your initial reaction was like, "My son doesn't need a mentor." And so we've created a bit of that stigma, and I think there's some messaging work that we need to do as a field to get around that. So happy to unpack that a little bit more if folks have questions about that. So what are the key takeaways around this first theme? I won't belabor these, but I think, we've really grown mentoring here in the US, especially programmatic mentoring. We still find some groups getting more than others. We've done a good job on some of these barriers to access of mentors, but there's other barriers that are now growing, right? This kind of lack of adults, this perhaps stigma around having a mentor, and program fit and program capacity. You also notice on that last slide, a lot of youth lingering on waiting lists and programs, unfortunately. That ties into the second theme, which was today's young people are reporting increases in that mentoring gap. This kind of regurgitates something that was on an earlier slide, but you'll see on the right-hand slide, I actually added in the numbers from that mentoring effect study 10 years ago. And what you'll see is now those young people were young then, but they are squarely in the millennial cohort in this current study. And so you'll see here, they told us some fairly similar things about their rates of mentoring. We found more programmatic mentoring here in the same age cohort, but that might have just been how we defined programmatic mentoring. I don't think there's a real difference there. But then for older and younger Gen Z, you begin to see these rates really slough off. And I think the blue bars at the bottom probably show it a little bit more clearly, but 40% of 18 to 21-year-olds either didn't have a mentor or don't think they had one. Now, sometimes young people get a little older and they reflect back and they're like, oh, maybe I had a mentor, but that would be true of all these generations, right? I think today's young people are keenly aware of what a mentor is. They know what it is and when it's absent from their life. And it is disturbing to see that number going in the wrong direction, I think, for all of us. Not surprisingly, given the historical precedent, but I think BIPOC youth are holding a little steadier here. I already mentioned this little uptick in programmatic mentoring for this youngest cohort, but still there's a pretty steady decline here as well, just not as dramatic, I think, as we see for white folks. So what is behind this trend? Now, we didn't ask enough questions to really unpack this deeply. I think obviously COVID and programs shutting down for a good year or two is partly behind this. But as we'll show on some slides in a minute, I don't think that's the full story. Well, I think we have a lot of trends here that predate the pandemic by many years. And so we did do a little speculation, and I will note that this is definitely speculation in the report about what may be behind this. My explanation for it is that this has been a decade of growing economic inequality in this country. That is an absolute fact. And that certainly will influence how and when American adults are able to show up for young people, right? Hey, I don't have any problem with the gig economy or someone driving a Lyft late at night, but every time I see a Lyft driver at midnight, I'm like, that's somebody working two jobs to make ends meet, and someone who's probably not going to be as available to kids in their community the next morning as they would be if they weren't scrambling to make ends meet. It's also been a decade of political division. I cannot remember a time in my 50 plus years on this earth where I've felt the divisions in our society as starkly as I do now. That certainly is going to influence how people show up as volunteers, where they volunteer, who they want to help when they volunteer. Unfortunately, I think there's some real fractions or, splits in American society that, we're just continuing to segment ourselves geographically, politically, socially, and that's going to show up in data like this. And then, as I mentioned, I think our own field's focus on who mentoring is for. We've really expanded mentoring for youth that have experienced a lot of need and a lot of trauma and could benefit the most from it. And that's great. I will never say we shouldn't do that. But I think we've also lost the thread of a message, which is that this is a basic piece of the human condition. Mentoring is part of human development at a core level. Everyone needs mentors and throughout the lifespan. And so I'd like to see our field get back to promoting that idea a little bit more, because I think it then, if we don't, it limits who thinks they should be participating in mentoring and how the general public thinks about mentoring young people. We also found, that there are some youth that really don't have anybody. One of the things we wanted to guard against was that sometimes a young person has a mentor, but they don't think of him as a mentor. They may call it some other name. So we asked a couple of questions around meaningful people. Before we even got to, did you have mentors in your life? We asked about, did you have a meaningful person, a person who helped you figure things out, gave you a little bit of guidance, and that could include romantic partners, older or younger siblings. And so it was a little bit more of an expanded, it still didn't include parents and primary caregivers, but we found that there was 6% of Gen Z had no mentor and said, I didn't even have a meaningful person growing up, meaning I really had no stable adult support outside of maybe my parents. That doesn't sound like 6%. Oh, that adds up to a couple million young people. And I guarantee if we were to go talk to kids 18 and younger and ask them these same questions, that 6% probably jumps up quite a bit as well. I wish I could tell you exactly who these young people are, but they didn't really hold together in a homogenous way. There wasn't some one defining characteristic where you could be like, oh, it's just this group and let's go mentor that group. It was kind of a mixed bag, but we were able to figure out that they're more likely to be living in rural areas, more likely to be girls and young women, growing up in poverty. Conversely, paradoxically, I guess, they've experienced fewer adverse life experiences than those who are getting mentoring. You might think, well, how is that? Why? And I think one of the things that happens in mentoring is, as we've talked about, kids with a lot of needs get a lot of adult attention. I also think tag kids and, kids that have like really high achievement get a lot of adult support, but then there's always this kind of missing middle. And I think a lot of these young people are in this missing middle. And then the quote here at the bottom of the screen, this is literally the last, I think, paragraph of the report itself. 64% didn't know how to find a mentor. Similar percentage didn't think there were programs available to them. Half didn't understand why they'd want a mentor or need one. 43%, no adult around me is good enough to be a mentor to me. That's a chilling statistic. Almost as chilling as that a quarter of them said their parent or guardian didn't want them to have a mentor. So this tells me we've got a lot of work to do still reaching people, especially in rural areas, low-income folks, about why mentoring can be helpful to them and their child, and taking some of the fear away from that. I can understand why it's weird and frightening to have a new adult come into your kid's life, but I do think we have some work to do around messaging on this. The third theme, and then we'll break for some questions real quick. Even when folks were mentored growing up, they remembered times where they wished they had mentoring. So this chart shows times of unmet need while you're growing up. And unfortunately, as you can see, baby boomers were like, yeah, no, I don't really remember a lot of times when I, wanted a mentor and didn't have one. You'll notice, though, that over time, that's gone up considerably. And then look at younger Gen Z on the left, 67%. Said there were times when I wanted a mentor and didn't have one. That's a really depressing number for me. And you can see the age ranges, right? That was true at elementary age, middle school age, high school age, and then exiting out into young adulthood, right? Like they know what a mentor is, and they certainly know when they're missing it and don't have it. So this was a very sobering slide, I think, and one that to me is a better way of thinking about the mentoring gap, right? It's not did you ever have one, it's who doesn't have one right now in your community and wants one but doesn't have an adult stepping up for them. To me, that's the mentoring gap in its truest sense. This gap is still concentrated on those growing up in low-income households, unfortunately. That's a pretty high jump there for poor and low income folks. And you see the time points of need, right? Middle school, high school, it's we are just not reaching those young people as much as we could. We also broke that down by race and ethnicity, as we've done on a few other previous slides. Now, you'll notice that white folks are saying, like, I've got fewer times when I wanted one. Well, they're also reporting less mentoring overall. And I don't know if that's a reflection of truly less need for it, or if that, I think, is maybe some cultural pride saying, I don't need the help of a mentor, I'm good. I don't know what that is. All I know is that BIPOC folks, and then you can see kind of a split of that here, are much more likely to say there were times when I wanted a mentor, didn't have one. Some troubling spikes for Native youth around high school age. And then for Asian young people, the middle school years seem to be a particular time of need. But all this to say is we've got more work to do around filling these gaps. We also looked at this by a bunch of other demographic factors. I won't break down each of these, but you'll notice folks who grew up identifying as LGBTQ+, much more likely to say there were times of unmet mentoring need. Now, they were more likely than the average American to say I had a mentor, looking back on it, but clearly there were times when those young people were really struggling and didn't have anyone. In the lower right, you'll also notice the breakdown of kind of rural and urban and suburban. Once again, fewer rural people saying I want a mentor, but also getting less mentoring in their lives. So we could parse that in a number of ways, but this is what it looks like based on where you grew up or where you're living now, but people don't really change where they live too much. So this, I think, is reflective of growing up as well. Interestingly, folks who eventually had a mentor at some point in their childhood or adolescence were more likely to say there were times when I wanted one and didn't have one. Now, that could mean that they waited for a long time and eventually got their mentor, but it could be that maybe I had a mentor when I was in middle school and they helped me with some middle school things, but then when I was in high school or as a young adult, I needed more mentoring and I had a gap then. But I also like to think that this, shows that young people who know what a mentor is and have experienced, they want more of it in their life, right? So I think once you've had the help of a caring adult, you recognize its absence probably a little bit more. We also asked folks kind of what was it that you wanted help with? Why did you need a mentor at these times? And they gave us a whole range of things kind of falling into these four big buckets of, I had some troubles, some issues I was going through, support and guidance wanted. And under each of these things, there was kind of an array of things. I do want to point out, though, the mental health needs. Now, 11%, this was for everybody in our sample. But as you can see, for that older Gen Z crowd, that popped up to 17%. And then for our youngest Gen Z survey respondents, a quarter of them, 25%, said I needed help with that. Now, most folks picked a number of things. Most folks did not just say it was one issue, it was a variety of things, but I find that to be really disturbing. 25% of those who didn't have a mentor really were struggling with their mental health and didn't get the help they need. So I'm going to pause here for some questions. Khadija, I think we got time for maybe one or two. Is there anything in that Q&A box that is sticking out to you as a good question?
Yeah, there is one question from Carolyn. Does Mentor promote virtual mentoring? Do you think virtually mentoring youth is beneficial or should be recommended?
I think virtual mentoring is one path forward that can get more mentors to more young people, particularly in rural communities. Especially if we can improve the broadband access of rural communities. I was disappointed that that got knocked out of the Build Back Better Act because to me, getting high-speed internet to every nook and cranny of America is deeply important if you want to spread adults being in kids' lives through virtual means. To me, it's all about what is your virtual program trying to do. I think those programs can be super effective around all kinds of academic goals, project-based learning. And I've even seen good virtual programs for youth that are isolated because of health conditions or disability, things like that. I think if what a young person really needs is some really deep love and support and some normalizing experiences with a healthy, caring adult, there is no substitute for being together in person with one another. But certainly I encourage every mentoring program that's in person to think about hybrid ways that you can bring virtual contact into the mix as well. I think that's a highly effective way. And frankly, if you're going to reach a teenager today, you're going to need one of these in your hand at some point because they don't respond to other ways sometimes. So yes, virtual is a potential solution here. Khadija, we got time for one more maybe?
Yeah, we just started getting a few, but the next one is from, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name, Veronique. In the interviews we did for our study in Canada, we heard from young people from diverse cultural and immigrant backgrounds that some of their parents were not so interested in them having a mentor, in part because of values of self-reliance and suspicion about the potential interference of a mentor in their parenting. Did you get any insights from your survey or focus groups about the hesitation that some cultural communities might have about mentoring as a valuable form of support, and how we could do a better job at reaching out to these groups?
That is a fantastic question. And off the top of my head, Chelsea, I don't remember if there were differences in some of those barriers to mentoring. I don't know if we sliced that by racial demographics, but I think what I will certainly say is that the way Americans conceive, especially programmatic mentoring, where it's like, okay, here's this stranger that's going to be paired with your kid, feels very foreign and different to many cultures. And I think those from more collectivist cultures that just have a view that there's an extended kin network that helps raise the children in our community. They especially find the insertion of a stranger from the outside to be a bit of a weird thing. It can be done, and sometimes you find mentors kind of joining this bigger family unit and get welcomed into that culture if it's through a program. But I think parents of all types have the ability to feel threatened by mentoring. I think but certainly, I think the way we do programmatic mentoring here in the US, it is a tougher thing to convey to folks from certain cultures without question. But I think there's a lot of variance within those cultures to that. Certainly, if you look at who's showing up at the doors of the nation's mentoring programs, they really reflect a lot of diverse communities and diverse cultures. So I know that there's a desire for parents from all those communities to get mentoring for their children, but yes, sometimes it is a tougher sell or seems more culturally odd to certain groups, and I've heard that many times over the years. Chelsea, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I will add, I actually just looked it up. So the actual incidence of respondents citing this as a barrier to their receiving is significantly higher among white communities. So those who grew up as a white folk were more likely to say that their parents did not want them to receive mentoring, significantly more likely statistically. Yeah. There's also some great information about conversations about this within the focus groups themselves. A lot of the conversation there talked about the role of culture and how that affected or changed their ability to receive mentoring. Yeah,
thank you, Chelsea. And this is why you're great. You looked that up in real time in the middle of this webinar. But yeah, and not surprisingly, us white folks tend to be the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps people and the rugged individualist types. And so I'm not surprised that that group would feel like, no, my kid does, we're good. We don't need help. Like there's a pride thing there that I think other cultures maybe recognize that it takes a village a little bit more than some folks in our society. I still remember a certain lady being laughed at for suggesting that phrase at one point about 20 years ago. So let's move on. I want to make sure we get through our last three themes. We do a little speed round here, go a little quicker through these, but I think folks are going to feel good about what we found in these next two themes. So Americans attribute a lot of their success to the mentors they had. On this slide, you'll see we wanted to know, like, how much of your success did you think the mentors during your childhood had on your whole life, right? And this kind of shows the percentage of folks that said 50% or more of my success, right? Half of my success or more. And you'll see here on the left that like that's 64% of Americans attributing half of their success or more. If you had both a program mentor and a natural mentor on the far right-hand side, 76% of those folks said half of my success or more. So there seems to be something particularly powerful about having had natural mentors and then a mentor through a program as well. So this was really exciting to us. I did not expect the rugged individualist Americans would say, no, half of my total success in life was other people helping me when I was young. That really blew my mind. It looks different based on how you grew up. So the poorer you were growing up, the more likely you were to say mentors influenced my life. That was also true today. Those in the working class today were most likely to feel that way. The lower your educational attainment, the more likely you were to say I was helped by mentors. And then as you see there, once again on the right, the more of those adverse factors you had during your childhood, there's a huge bump there for kids who had 4 or more of those things. So young people that were experiencing a tremendous amount of need really valued what this brought to their life. Now, Gen Z is reporting a little bit less impact. You'll see here compared to millennials, there were some pretty stark differences between those who had a mentor and read and those who did not on a number of things. This actually mirrors almost perfectly what we found with this same group of kids 10 years ago in that mentoring effect study. But you'll notice that a lot of those differences have washed away for Gen Z. Now, some of that is because the unmentored kids are catching up to those who had mentoring, which I guess is good. But I thought it was interesting that there were really only 2 areas that we looked at in both studies where there seemed to be a difference around having had a mentor, and that was volunteering in your community and holding a leadership position of some kind in school or in an organization or a club, something like that. We also found really good correlations between having had a mentor as a young person and sense of belonging, perceived mental health, and a little bit around economic mobility. And I'm going to unpack that one a little bit more. So basically, the more likely, or if you had a mentor, you were more likely to say, I had a strong sense of belonging as a young person, and you're more likely to say that now as an adult. Now, what we don't have here is cause and effect, right? You could have had a very strong sense of belonging when you were a kid, and that helped you find mentors, and you still have a strong sense of belonging now. But we also found a similar thing around mental health. So stronger mental health as a young person, stronger mental health now if you had a mentor. And I'll show you a slide in a minute that tells me I think this is partially due to the mentoring and not other things. But we did wanted to see, like, were those who mentored move up the socioeconomic ladder at all? Now, I will say, if from childhood to where you are as an adult, if you moved up the ladder, if you stayed the same, if you went down the socioeconomic ladder, rates of mentoring across the board are even for those 3 groups. But we went back and looked at specifically young people that grew up in poverty or in the working class, and as adults have moved up the socioeconomic ladder. We found a much higher rate of mentoring for folks that had climbed up. Now, once again, that is not proof of causality. That is not to say if we just mentored everybody, they'd all be upper middle class in the end. But we did find, I think, a little bit of evidence that mentors can have a big impact around helping people climb out of multi-generational poverty, particularly through educational achievement and reduced mental health needs and a greater sense of belonging. I think those things all tie together, and we unpack those pretty thoroughly in the report. Then lastly, like I said, we asked about those most meaningful adults and how did they support you? We asked who was that most meaningful mentor. Was it someone through a program or someone naturally? On the right-hand side here, you'll see that natural mentors were nominated as that most special one at about a 3-to-1 ratio, which is not surprising. Most people get their mentoring not through a program. But if you had a program mentor and a natural mentor, it was basically a coin flip as to which one of those you picked as your most meaningful. And I thought that was really important. It shows that these kind of artificially created relationships, these friendships that never would have existed without a program, can wind up being as meaningful as the most deep kin-like relationship a young person has, right? And so to me, that really speaks to the power of our mentoring programs. The different color bands here are the different ages when folks reported having that meaningful mentor. I won't get into that in the interest of time. We asked in the top row here, kind of if you had a program mentor, where did they come from? You'll see a lot of school and after school programs making those connections, but a healthy contribution from religious institutions. Virtual mentoring as kids get older starts to become much more prominent as well. Then on the bottom row, natural mentoring sources, teachers, friends of family, extended family members, all well represented across the ages. You'll see interesting little fluctuations here, like for ages 19 to 21, that brown bar representing coworkers or bosses becomes a lot more prominent. So just some interesting shifts in the distribution of where young people are finding these natural mentors. But I'm kind of stunned by the diversity of where kids find these mentors. It just really is a reminder to all of us that interact with young people in our jobs, even if we're not mentors or running a mentoring program, kids will find you and they will gravitate towards you if they think you can be that special adult. And so it's up to all of us to kind of be prepared when they seek us out in these types of places. We lastly, and I think we end with this, asked, how did this most meaningful mentor help you? And I want to focus really here on the top things. Help me build a sense of belonging. So thinking back a couple slides to young people that had a mentor having a stronger sense of belonging in their childhood and now, this is why I think it was a lot, the mentoring causing that. It helped me build that sense of belonging was the most important thing. Second most important, simply having fun together. I think in the interest to put mentoring as this solution to infinite problems for kids in the country, we forgot that this is supposed to be fun still at the end of the day, that this should bring joy to a young person's life. And then lastly, help me understand who I am as a person, right? So building identity, building belonging. These seem to be the key things that mentors did. I think this is a great list. Most respondents picked several things from this list, but these were the ones that rose to the top. So quickly, what does this mean for our movement? I think if you're talking to folks about these findings, I would emphasize the following. We have done a great job of growing programmatic mentoring over the last 30 years. We should celebrate that. But I will also say this is a bit of a warning to us all. We are at best holding steady as to where we were about a decade or 15 years ago, right? We are not getting more mentoring to more kids in the last decade. The demand, I think, is rising among young people for mentors. And even when they have a mentor, they want more mentoring. They recognize that there's a need for more in their life. So we need to redefine that gap a little bit. But I think if we can close it, what we also learned here is that Americans deeply value the mentoring that they get. They credit it for where they went in their life, even if their life wasn't a smashing success by objective measures. They feel like better and more successful people because they had this growing up. And that these mentors come from all walks of life, right? And so as we get more mentors to more young people, how can those folks from different domains of a kid's life communicate more and kind of work together to support that young person? Our path forward, and then I'll end with this, I think we need an all hands on deck push to really address the growing need of today's young adults, particularly around mental health needs. I think we need to foster a mentoring mindset in as many adults as possible. And that doesn't mean you have to serve as a mentor. Maybe that means you just donate to some local causes. Maybe it means you vote for politicians that put the needs of young people first and the real needs, not fake made up needs, right? So I think that is something that will help with this. I also, as I said, want to see every mentoring relationship emphasize belonging and identity. No kid's going to achieve everything if they don't know who they are and how they fit into this crazy world. And then I think the last call to action here is finding these young people that don't have any meaningful relationships. They don't have a mentor, but they don't really have other adults too. And I think we need to seek them out in our communities and find out who they are and bring them into the fold of our mentoring movement. So you may be feeling like Homer here, overwhelmed with information and wanting to repeat all the things about all the stuff, but I hope that was a clear explanation of our findings. Let's talk shop. I know we are at time, so if folks need to drop off, that is okay, but I will stick around for like 5 more minutes here and answer a few questions if we've got them. Khadija, do you want to?
Yeah, we have a few. Addressing mental health takes more than mentoring. Are there programs out there that work with mentors / mentees while addressing mental health needs and concerns?
Yes, and I could not agree more, and I do not want to suggest that mentors are the solution to all youth's mental health needs, particularly young people that have kind of severe mental health challenges. But there are 2 ways where I think mentors can really help, and I'll give an example of both. You probably heard scholars like Gene Rhodes and such talking a lot these days about supportive accountability, where if a young person has mental health needs, they probably need clinical help. They probably need a real therapist, psychologist working with them. They might even need medication for that mental health need. But a mentor could be a heck of an asset in making sure that you get the most out of that clinical treatment. So just across the river from me in Vancouver, Washington, a really wonderful program called Great Life Mentoring that does exactly that. Kids get mental health services, clinical services through the county mental health extension, but this program also gives them a mentor. And the mentor's job is to make sure that you get to your appointments, take your meds, and then to also just give you emotional support, right? So I think that is a huge way that mentoring can support clinical services for kids. The other example I'll give, though, is that we do know that you can train mentors to do some light mental health work, right? So there are programs out there that give their mentors some training around things like cognitive behavioral principles or motivational interviewing principles, things drawn from the world of psychology that you can weave into a mentoring relationship, right? The YMCA has a program called Reach and Rise, which is a cognitive behavioral based mentoring program. So that's a good example of that. I also think that we've got a whole body of research on mentoring, just garden variety mentoring and the, big brothers, big sisters type programs, boys and girls clubs, et cetera, that mentoring can really help with what's called depressive symptoms. So that may not be clinical depression in its true sense, but anyone who works with teenagers knows that there's a lot of moodiness and sadness and times of isolation and times of feeling just down about things. And we've got a strong body of research on mentors supporting that and alleviating that sense of depression and loneliness. So I think mentors can help on multiple fronts, but no, they are never the total solution around that. It's just that the crisis around it is so bad right now that I feel like that should be an area of emphasis in helping where we can as a movement. Khadija, let's do one more question. And then if folks have other submitted questions, I can answer those via email later today or tomorrow. So we'll get some answers out to any unanswered questions here. One more for the road. Khadija, what do we got?
All right, so Carrie said, we are a faith-based nonprofit mentoring organization. Do you have any data among faith-based groups and how it may be affected by the decline in church attendance and influence?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I mostly see now, I have to admit, we didn't break down much in our findings here based on if you said you had a natural mentor through a faith organization. We didn't do a lot of analysis on kind of how your needs differed and so forth. My guess is that most of the young people that are getting mentored through a faith institution are probably attendees of that faith institution, right? They probably are part of a, if it's a church, some kind of Sunday youth group or some kind of young life thing, or, there's a variety of things. So I mostly see kind of within congregation mentoring. I do see, however, more churches trying to go out and be involved in the schools. I worked with someone in the Washington, D.C. area last year who was attempting to do just that, mobilize a lot of the congregations in the D.C. area to get more involved and send mentors into the schools to help out as, classroom aides and mentors and things like that. There's obviously the concerns around, proselytizing and things like that. But, you know, I think it's a beautiful thing when the faith communities of this country get involved outside of their own walls and out into the community, right? And so I think it's an area of growth. I'll have to look and see. Off the top of my head, I don't know if that rate of being mentored through a faith institution is also declining over time. My guess is that it's crept up the way most of these rates of mentoring have crept up over the decades. But I'll go back and look and see if there was a trend in that declining as well. But yeah, I don't know if declining membership in faith institutions is influencing the mentoring kids are getting, but you know, it may very well be. So, well, I think that's it. I could probably answer your questions all day, but in the interest of time and in the interest of having this recording not be super long, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you for being with us and being in conversation about this study. Please go download it off the Mentor website. If you want to reach out to Chelsea or myself, here's our emails on the screen. And I really thank all of you for the work that you do. And you know, especially those of you in programs. It's clear to me that we're filling gaps in young people's lives that would otherwise not get filled. And I think our mission is to just go do more of it in the years ahead. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week and reach out if you have any other questions about this study. So thank you. Bye.